Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's event. My name is John Coates, and I'm the director of the Energy Biosciences Institute, which is the sponsor of this exciting event tonight. Before we start, I just want to give a little brief background to the Energy Biosciences Institute, so that you have some context before I introduce our guests. So, as UC Berkeley celebrates its 150 years of achievements this year, we look forward to a sustainable energy future. The EBI is certainly part of that future, and our focus is on developing technologies to help us get towards energy sustainability. So the EBI is a partnership institute of UC Berkeley, Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, and University of Illinois Urbana. And it was formed in 2007 with corporate sponsorship and a research focus originally on biofuels, sustainability, and climate change. Over its 11-year history, it's brought in almost $275 million of research funds to the partner institutes and funded around 350 researchers, producing almost 800 papers and 60 patents and patent applications. So over the last 2 years, we have expanded our mission to take advantage of a shift in the long-term energy focus towards electrification and the significant advances that have been made in the STEM fields throughout our partnership campuses. And in 2017, Shell joined our sponsorship group with one of the company's largest ever financial commitments to an academic institution. This commitment is designed to fund research focused on advanced energy production, storage, and interconversion, and includes areas such as photovoltaics, battery technology, material sciences, computation, in addition to biosciences. In the last 2 months, we just completed selection and funding of our first 22 projects, so it's a very exciting time for us. And this agreement is supporting faculty, postdocs, and students across the 3 campuses. Tonight we have the great honor of welcoming Harry Breckelmans, who's the Director of Projects and Technology and a member of the Executive Committee of Royal Dutch Shell. Harry is visiting Berkeley today as a continuation of the strengthening relationship between Royal Dutch Shell and the EBI. Harry began his career in Shell in 1990 after he graduated with a degree from Delft Technical University in the Netherlands in petroleum engineering. And he's had a meteoric rise in the company since then, taking on a new position nearly every 2 years as he rose to his current position, which he has held since 2014. He's also a board member of the Global Leadership and Technology Exchange, which connects businesses, governments, and civil society in seeking more efficient, low-carbon growth. So Harry is truly one of those people who is directing our future in the energy scenario. We are also honored to have Diane Dwyer tonight in conversation with Harry. Diane has worked in television journalism in the San Francisco Bay Area for 25 years. She's a 2-time Emmy Award-winning journalist and a faculty member of UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business, where she develops and teaches a course entitled Media Consultancy Using Design Thinking. Diane is also a founder and owner of Dwyer Media Consultancy, which provides services to clients in fields as varied as pet retailers to nanotechnology. In addition to this, she serves as an MC, auctioneer, and advisor for more than 24 nonprofit corporations, or organizations, sorry. So let's invite them up to the podium tonight. And before I let them start, I have one more thing to say. Well, actually, 2 more things to say. First of all, I would just like to personally thank the people who made this event tonight possible for all of their organization. Shelley Brosnick and Cindy Taste, who you probably met on the way in, and they're both sitting down there in the audience. They've worked tirelessly over the last several months to arrange all of the details involved in a visit of this magnitude, including tonight's discussion. And finally, after the event tonight, we do have a reception, and you're all welcome to attend and have some one-on-one time with our guests. I'll pass it over to Diane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know we have in our audience graduate students, faculty members, members of the community, so it's very nice to have all of these folks here and a diverse, I'm sure, sort of opinions on what we're going to be talking about tonight. So we did hand out cards to everyone. Please feel free as we're going through our conversation. When you think of a much better question than I have, throw that down on a card. And if you hand it over, if you pass it over to the outside aisles, we'll be able to collect them, and I will be asking those questions in a few minutes. So that would be great. We'd love that type of interaction because it'll make it that much more interesting for all of us and you. So first things first, very nice to have you.
Thank you, Diane.
Yes. You had a chance to tour the beautiful Berkeley campus today and see some exciting things going on, you told me. Any thoughts on, as this relationship starts with Shell and UC Berkeley, as far as what you saw today that excites you about the future of energy, hopeful about perhaps some, breakthroughs, even if we're at the seed stages of all of this?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's my first visit here,
we planned the perfect day for you.
Indeed, the weather was fantastic, but I'm deeply impressed, we like to think of ourselves as a leading institution in energy, and we like to partner with other leading institutions in, amongst others, energy, and that's certainly, I think, what we found today. People working at the cutting edge of science, but science that's relevant for us. Around cleaner energy, around capturing carbon, and turning renewable energy into good products, maybe even solar fuels, and so that was exciting. I always find the passion of the people that we meet is just second to none, and it matches actually quite a lot of the passion I see in my organization when it comes to the scientists we have, and so there's a good match, I think, in terms of a passion for improvement, a passion for science, for technology. And then besides that, this is just an amazing institution. If nothing else for the location, but also all the other many things it brings. So it was a good day, very good day.
I'm glad to hear it. And on that note, to start it off with sort of a Cal type of question, a Berkeley type of question, is it realistic? Is it honest? Is it smart to ask of an oil company to play this role in trying to be an agent of change for the environment, for climate change? It's, there seems to be an inherent conflict, and yet you tell me there may not be.
Well, it is fair to ask that of us. I would also say we're an energy company. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the energy system today still relies for 80% on fossil fuels. So we produce and sell oil and gas and chemicals, and so we're consistent with the energy system as it is. And we know that in the coming decades, the energy system will transition. It will, we'd like to say it'll change more in the next 30 years than it has changed in the last 80. Mm-hmm. So the change is accelerating. It will have to move to a lower carbon energy system. And we're an energy company. We're going to move with the system, or we're going to move the system. So we're not scared of that. We're not worried about it. And if people's expectations are to that extent, we don't think that it's unfair. It's fair. And there is no intrinsic contradiction. I think we can make these things work. So
how is there no intrinsic contradiction? So an energy company, not an oil company, but with your primary source right now being oil, I guess, and gas as well, is the concept that it just that change is coming with or without you, and so why not lead the way? Or I assume your ultimate goal is or responsibility is to your shareholders, so there must be a way where you think this is where you're going to be able to make the most money and be the most productive as a company as well. Mm.
Yeah, so I think naturally this transition will take a number of decades. And depending on the forecasts and predictions you believe, We could see peak oil in the 2030s. By maybe the end of this century, the whole system will have decarbonized entirely, maybe with the exception of some heavy industry or so that's very difficult to decarbonize. But that's the timescale we have to think across. Meanwhile, of course, world population will grow. And many people who have no access to energy will want to have access to energy because generally it brings good things to us. I mean, that's what we have all experienced over our lifetimes, that energy brings good things. But it also brings unintended consequences or externalities that we need to deal with. In some ways that's not new, because if you think back 30, 40, 50 years, that was the emergence of natural gas, which is a cleaner energy source than coal, and actually replaced a lot of coal in the energy mix to generate electricity. And that has a positive impact on the carbon footprint. We were one of the leaders in that space. And that was no contradiction to us. That was kind of naturally evolving our product slate. And we will see that happen over the coming few decades as well. It is a natural evolution on the one hand, and it's one also that we feel we can show leadership in. And meanwhile, also in that process, be able to fulfill the needs of our shareholders, which is around returns and dividends, and there's no bad thing about that. At one level, if you polarize that, he said, well, we need to stop producing oil and gas tomorrow. Well, I think that's wishful thinking, because that's going to be very hard to do. And if we are to do that, we're going to deny hundreds of millions of people access to energy, which in its own right, of course, has significant consequences too.
What is Shell's position on that, on the consequences, on climate change and the causes?
Well, I mean, it's clear that the combustion of fossil fuels amount to CO2 emissions that in the end have an impact on global warming. That is something that we have recognized for decades already. And we've also advocated for a number of ways and means to arrest that, carbon pricing being one of them. I think been very clear that you need to provide effective stimuli and incentives to people to drive them towards making different choices. Carbon pricing is one of them. Providing cleaner products is another one. But that's not something that happens overnight. Meanwhile, you're relying on the world economy to continue to move, for which we need energy. And of course, we're not the sole decider in that process. We provide products to people who want them. And so I think, in the long and the short run, or in the final analysis, this is something that we can only make happen if we do it together. One of the reasons we're here is that we're keen to develop technologies or to support the development of technologies that will make that difference. But we also know that we're going to have to rely on policies and government interventions to help deploy these technologies or to provide other means like carbon pricing. We're going to have to rely on individuals, consumers, to make the right choices. And we're going to rely on corporations, big and small, to be able to provide products to people to have these choices. Only when we do all of that can we actually, at the societal level and the level of the world energy system, move to a decarbonized energy system, say in keeping with the Paris commitment.
You're asking a lot.
We're all asking a lot.
Of a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay, you brought up the Paris Climate Agreement. The United States pulled out of that agreement and of the accord. So any thoughts on what kind of impact that might have on the efforts there, and what type of impact it perhaps had on Shell or the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, it's good to have seen that commitment made by 150 countries or so. But of course, it's only that. It's a commitment. Each country has pledged a nationally determined contribution to the extent that they have described a decarbonization pathway. Most governments and countries don't really have a game plan as to how they will get there. And so we're actually involved actively with a number of governments in a number of countries, as well as some other actors, either in industry or in society, saying, so how would we do that? So in my own country, in the Netherlands, we brought together, or we have been one of the parties that brought together a coalition of 50 companies, governments, NGOs, people from society, and said, so we need to develop a roadmap that is in keeping with the Dutch contribution to Paris, but it also provides a meaningful set of actions that we can all sort of get behind and exercise or realize. that are challenging and stretching, yet realistic. Because we can't simply say we need to have reduced our emissions by 50% by 2040 without a plan to get there.
Right.
That's just going to lead to a lot of tension and stresses that are not helpful.
But what does it mean having the U.S. not part of that at this point? Does that take momentum out of that movement?
Well, it's disappointing, and we have, as a company, made that clear. But also, we feel, to your point, that there is enough momentum, and individuals at every level will act, whether at the corporate level or individual consumers. So I don't think actually it will make a huge difference in whether and how the world gets there. But it would have been good to have seen that signal in a much more positive way, to say we want to go there. And we're behind it, and let's work together to make it happen.
I'll stick on the U.S. theme for just a second. The other thing that's happened recently is President Trump's suggest opening of the 40-some offshore oil drilling sites. Your thoughts, Shell's thoughts on that decision?
Well, maybe more broadly, if I look at energy over the last 20 years or so, the two biggest developments have been the emergence of renewable energy, in terms of wind and solar particularly, as well as the shale gale. So the shale revolution in North America particularly, for as much as gas or oil. And that's really changed the dynamic in the markets. It's changed the emissions trajectory of the US because a lot of gas has displaced coal. And so it's been a hugely important development. And it's in its own right, of course, the availability of affordable energy is a good thing, generally, for society. Now, there is another question, of course, which is for how long and what type of energy. And so to open up and to provide more access in some ways is a good thing. But I think individual companies like ourselves will make choices as to where or not we want to play.
Do you know what choice that might be?
Well, we have committed clearly to the Gulf of Mexico and the deep water there. We've done the same in Mexico and Brazil. And it's in part because we have a strong position there. We have a lot of capability in that space. And we feel we can develop oil and gas in a very robust, economically robust and responsible way there. We'll think twice about, for example, re-engaging in heavy oil or Arctic for that matter, because we don't think the cost-benefit equation warrants us investing there. But that's a decision we take as a commercial entity and as a company.
Sure.
Others may take other decisions. Yeah.
Right. And on that same front, we were talking earlier just a little bit about electricity and the movement toward electricity, but how to figure out the conundrum with electricity and where electricity comes from and that it's creating. So where do you see the future of electricity playing a part of this and clean electricity versus other?
Yeah, and I think to that extent, the two things we'll see is we'll see the energy system increasingly electrify, for sure. And the second one is that we'll see more and more renewable energy, electricity generation. And so that's a trend, of course, we understand and we're keen to participate in. And if you've watched the news over the past few weeks, then we have made a number of investments in renewable power. Just over a year ago, we committed to the development of an offshore wind park in the Netherlands, my country. More recently in the US here, we acquired a significant stake in a solar company. We acquired a company in the latter stages of last year that provides electrical charging services in Europe. And so if you look at our new energy business, which was established 2 years ago, which will house much of this business. The two areas of focus for us are power, the power value chain, and new fuels, biofuels, hydrogen. And in the power value chain, we want to be a significant player. We already are. We're one of the largest power traders in the US. And so we're going to be looking to combine our trading capabilities together with physical positions to be able to provide an offering to customers that is electrical and low carbon.
And yet the innovations, the technology is costing a fortune to do all of that and figure it out. And yet what it's producing right now in terms of energy is quite small, correct?
Yeah.
So when do you see that switch, right? And this happens all the time. The R&D, you've got to put a bunch of money in. Are we at the point now where we're making that turn, or how far out do you think that might be?
Yeah, I think that's still a ways away, because at the moment, as you say, in electricity, of course, the share of renewable power is increasing, but it's still relatively small. In mobility, it's very small. And as I said earlier, 80% of the current of today's energy system is still largely fossil fuels. So we haven't reached the tipping point yet. And as we're headed towards the tipping point, we'll see all sorts of challenges. I mean, you mentioned the cost of the technology, and indeed, the returns in the renewable energy business aren't stellar, and it's not something that's not trivial, of course. But also, you get at some point integration. You will encounter integration issues at the system level, which is well, how do you deal with intermittency? For example, natural gas is a good complementary partner to renewable energy because of the intermittency. So in terms of peak and base load, this is a good marriage, which is as much as we've been advocating. But without that, you're going to be exposed, as you see currently at peak, where power prices for renewable energy are negative. And so how do you make money in that business? Not to mention the kind of grid and capacity issues that physically you face when you're starting to load up the grid. And so there are going to be a number of significant barriers and boundaries to the speed at which renewable power can grow. And that will be a limiting factor towards the growth of it, whereas there's no doubt that it will grow.
Any crystal ball on when we might see real growth there?
Well, it's really hard to tell, and the other point there is it will be different from state to state, from country to country, from place to place, which is the earlier point I made around. So every country will have to face up to a different roadmap, which is all around the endowment they have with respect to natural resources, their economic situation, the customer and consumer preferences. And so each and every country will be on their own trajectory and their own speed of transition.
Is there a way to have any, not control, but I guess influence over customer wants? Because there's a conflict there too, right? What we want versus what's good for the environment, and education about that. Certainly different here than in other countries, but even within this country, there's quite a disparity.
Yeah, most definitely, and I think it starts at one level, at the level of being informed, understanding the choices you have and the consequences that carries. Then there are a number of other, if you want, tools and modalities. One is around the product offering. So we have clean fuels, energy and fuel and efficient fuels. We have biofuels. And of course, increasingly, people have choices, say, around mobility to choose electrical mobility. Right. And so I think the breadth and diversity of choices, the economic stimuli and incentives that are provided around it, and the awareness that we all have with respect to our choices and their consequences, I think are three very important layers, and they need to be put thoughtfully together. If you do that, I think you can make a lot of progress. But then you look in more detail at different countries and you see that they're all misaligned or not very effectively staggered. And that's a missed opportunity in my mind.
With your traveling the world, seeing innovation and technology, and are you seeing, whether it's here at UC Berkeley, the lab, elsewhere, are there any breakthroughs you want to tell us about that you think are potentially, the next, not big thing, but interesting thing that you hadn't expected? Or what type of innovations are you seeing out there that you're most excited about?
Yeah, I certainly think that California is a leading light.
I would have to agree.
And in terms of the technology, in terms of the policy and the thoughtfulness, And so when you look at the developments around energy storage, in part the ones we saw here today, then I'm very encouraged and to some extent surprised at the progress. We looked today at some other examples where it's about capturing carbon dioxide, and one in particular around nanotubes in a lattice structure, and the way that is progressing at a speed that I hadn't expected. So if anything is to happen, I think you can't rule out it's going to be happening here. But equally, when I travel to China, there's enormous amounts of effort invested there. Because of course, the government realizes how important it is to offer people clean air, and meanwhile to offer people energy for development. And so they, in my mind, are putting together some really thoughtful policies. We were talking just earlier today around the progress there in terms of carbon pricing, and they're really serious about it. The progress there, of course, in terms of installing renewable capacity, which they're clearly leading. And on the back of that, they've developed a whole industry, in the manufacturing of panels. And equally there, the associated improvement in technology see there. I wouldn't rule out any breakthroughs to emerge in China, which is also why we're very much present there. So those are almost on the polar opposites of where things are about to happen. And then I would point at Europe, which is very challenging in many ways. But the thing that's developing there is I think people are increasingly demanding change, and at the local level are driving significant change in terms of distributed energy and the choices they make and what they're expecting their local councils to do and so on. So I think that's a development. It's almost like a social development in its own right.
Interesting.
That I think is important to watch, and we are very close to that, of course. So that's rather fundamental.
Have you seen any specifics there of things that have happened, even if it's just in one city or one town or one community of they're doing something that we haven't seen elsewhere?
Yeah, in the Netherlands, but maybe even more so in the Scandinavian countries. The pace of decarbonization on account of what municipalities are doing, I think is rather mind-blowing or leading to that extent. And where you see national governments struggle more with it, I think people are kind of empowering themselves and delegating decision-making to the municipal level, where you see a lot of progress in terms of public transport, or you see cooperative efforts around energy provision, low-carbon energy provision, which really goes down to the grassroots levels. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You'll need that too,
Talk about that all the time, regardless whether it's energy or anything else, right?
Absolutely.
You started at the city council level and you work from there, and you actually can see and touch and taste the change a little bit more. Are there any other projects specifically going on at Shell? I know you're investing in places like Berkeley and research institutions. What's happening at Shell?
Well, one thing in my mind that's very significant is, you asked earlier, what does the Paris Agreement mean to you? Well, and at one level, of course, it's sort of a global and a country level commitment to decarbonize to a certain point. Then you ask, so what's your role as a company? Now we've taken that to almost institutionalize our own commitment to say, okay, well, we need to be moving at pace with society, and we need to decarbonize towards that same point, which is a 2-degree trajectory, which implies that the world has to decarbonize by something like 50% on balance by 2050. And so let's take that cue and make that the same ambition for us. So our ambition is to take the carbon footprint of our company down by 50% by 2050. And we like it.
That is the mission?
That is the mission.
Okay.
So I'm an engineer, so it gives me a logical framework and a structure
absolutely.
to move towards. And then we said, so we can now paint that trajectory. But what is more meaningful is that we don't just do that for our own carbon footprint with respect to our refineries or our upstream operations, but we also, in that regard, take accountability for the emissions of the customers of our products. So if you fill up your tank at a Shell retail station, so we will take accountability for the emissions that are associated with combusting that fuel. And we will want to reduce the footprint of all of that by 50% by 2050, which is a very bold goal, and it's very challenging, but that sort of fits within the Paris framework. So we now have a framework. We love frameworks as engineers, because we can peel that back towards saying, okay, what does that mean for our product portfolio and for our technology development and our investments? And so we're now trying to structure that back to say, so how will we get there? And then you'll see that sort of turn into our strategy where, well, what that means is we're going to have to increase the sales of natural gas. Now, we're already a leading player, but we can increase our market share. We will want to grow the sales of biofuels, where we're already a leading player, but we can increase our sales there. We want to grow our share of renewable power generation. We'll look at some of the announcements we made recently. We will want to offer more electrical charging at our retail stations, so people have that choice. We will want to create carbon sinks, because society will need carbon sinks by 2050 if we are to get to that goal. So we have started, as of late last year, to provide people at our retail stations the option to buy offsets. And do that by making investments in projects for reforestation or soil improvement, or projects that we can really see and touch. Because it's very hard at this point in time to decarbonize the entirety of the mobility system. But if you're a responsible motorist, you could choose to buy an offset. And we've been surprised by the uptake.
Really?
Yeah.
People are doing that.
In Europe, they're certainly doing that. Now, I wouldn't vouch for Texas, but
Okay.
I would certainly have my hopes out that eventually, people will make that choice.
And how do you work the trust factor in there? So it sounds great, right? These are the things that we need to hear for the environment and for people and companies like Shell that have power and money and influence. But how do you build that trust that that's what you're really doing when today we're so dependent on fossil fuels?
Yeah, look, at one level, I think that is just by being transparent, and telling the story and engage. I mean, the reason I'm here tonight is to provide insight into the whys and the hows. To not sugarcoat it. I mean, the reason we're saying it's going to take decades is this is a big system, and there's a lot of hysteresis and stickiness in the system. I still have a combustion engine, and you may have too. And
I have my little electric car out there, but then again, that's coming from a coal-burning electric power plant somewhere, so there you go.
So there's a lot of stickiness in the system, and we can't deny that, and we have to, I think, face up to that realistically. When we offer people offsets, of course, one thing they will say is, what are you doing then? Because I'm paying for this.
Absolutely.
So we're offering you the possibility, but of course we have to, at the same time, we have to also decarbonize our product slate. So we have to come up with cleaner fuels. We have to come up with products for people that drive electrical. And then they should be provided through renewable energy rather than coal. And you won't find coal being provided, as a means to charge at our retail stations. And so we're going to have to decarbonize our product mix to show that we are serious about this. But meanwhile, also, we shouldn't shy away from saying, and meanwhile, we will also continue for some time to come to offer people a fossil fuel alternative. Because in many places, that's the only alternative that is available. And nonetheless, in those countries, people will still want mobility, they will want heat, they will want cooling, and they're entitled, in my mind, to have that, to be able to develop. Because if the alternative is poverty, well, we can't deny them that choice.
Right. The basics of a healthy life.
Yeah, that we take for granted.
Right. I do have a gas car too, because the electric only gets me about 60 miles, so there's only so far you can go, and I've been stranded a few times. And those are challenges, right, that keep people from doing those things. So the other part of this whole mix, I think, and you may tell me I'm crazy, but the self-driving cars. Do you see a marriage there as well, and some of the solution with the technology of self-driving cars?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this is, of course, developing very rapidly. And I was actually at one of our logistics partners the other day, and looking at how they are decarbonizing their supply chain and their activities. And they were very much thinking about platooning, where you use autonomous vehicles, in the heavy transport. And so this is emerging rapidly. And of course, that will contribute to efficiency. But once again, there is a certain pace of change that the system can handle. And then there is something beyond that is going to be impossible, very difficult to stomach. So for sure, this is going to happen, but it will take time. And we will find ways to play there. One of the things that I think many people don't know is we're one of the world's biggest retailers. We have 43,000 retail outlets globally. Many of them, they might be around your corner. That's more than Starbucks or McDonald's.
Not more than Starbucks.
No, it is. Many more than Starbucks. And McDonald's. And so we have access to customers, and we have a footprint that allows us to pivot, as this energy transition unfolds. So we are pretty optimistic about the future. Also in the sense that we can play a very productive and positive role in that regard.
For the students here, looking out for them in 25 years, you've suggested what we need to do as part of the pieces of the puzzle with all of this, but where do you, if you were to, I'm not trying to go to the Jetsons, but in 25, 30 years, where do you see how we function, how we get around, how we not communicate, but certainly transport?
Wow, 25 years from now.
Yeah, it'll be here before we know it.
It'll be here before you know it. And so I think many of the developments that you alluded to will see, and they'll become commonplace. Right? Different modes of public transport, a significant proportion of the overall transport system will have decarbonized, but not all of it.
Right.
That's, we're still not in 2050, so a significant proportion of it will still be either fossil fuels or traditional modes and means. But we will have seen a significant shift. We will probably see a quilt of solutions. So we continue to invest in hydrogen because we think that is still one of the solutions. And if you look at California, there's a small number of stations where you can fill up your car with hydrogen, but it is growing, and the state is committed to it. When I go to Japan, there's a clear commitment. So in different places, you will see a different solution set interacting. So more public transport that will have been decarbonized. But if you look on the roads, you'll still have light vehicles either powered by electricity or hydrogen or biofuels, and then still some by fossil fuels. So I think you'll see that whole mix. You'll see more electrification more generally. You'll probably see more distributed energy. The developments I just alluded to. If you look at India, there is a drive towards, certainly in the rural areas, distributed solar. And so you'll see that grow significantly in developing countries. But it will be a quilt globally. There won't be one solution that fits all, for sure. And there'll be laggards and leaders. So I guess it'd be hard to discern where we are in 25 years' time. And for the students here, 25 years from now, I hope that some of you will be in this seat, and you'll have joined one of the leading energy companies called Shell. 25 years from now, I'm pretty convinced we've been successful for 120 years. Another 25 years.
You're confident they'll be around?
I'm confident about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
On that note, I see John over there with some questions, so let's see what some of the folks have to ask, and we can go down that road for a little bit. Thank you very much. Okay, so handwriting, people, really. No. I'll do my best. So how can expansion of biofuels minimize impacts on food production and prices, especially for low-income populations around the world?
Yeah, that certainly is a big societal issue. And it's one of the reasons that, the way we think about biofuels is it's going to be restricted to only certain geographies and jurisdictions. So we have a big biofuels business in Brazil. And we know to a large extent that it does not impact the food value chain in the way we produce it, in the way that we site the locations and the plantations, and so and then of course, Brazil has facilitated, the government has facilitated the development of the ethanol business in particular through government incentives, and so then the rest will follow. So I think it's a finely tuned system that'll make sure that there is no significant interference with other important parts of what society needs. That's not going to necessarily be the case in every country. In India it's going to be vastly more difficult. In China it's going to be hard. But then in the US it's well possible. So first of all, it's very situational. And it needs the right construct in terms of the technology, the government framework around it, and then consumer choices. And those need to be surrounded with a lot of transparency around how are you making sure that this biofuel is sourced from bagasse or agricultural waste, or maybe even domestic waste. We are at the moment, we have built a demonstration facility at our campus in India where we're producing clean biofuels from domestic waste. So we can take agricultural waste, so it's bagasse, or domestic waste to turn into clean biofuels. And so we're in a space where you say that really doesn't compete with the food value chain. And secondly, India has a huge waste problem. And we're seeing that we may have found a sweet spot where there's an enormous amount of government interest to accelerate this. And so it's also about what biofuels we're talking about.
Right.
And where we're going to commercialize them.
And any of those countries with that type of population is going to have an enormous amount of waste, domestic waste.
Absolutely.
That's going to be very interesting. Okay, so you mentioned an effort to come up with a roadmap to decarbonization. The UN has already released the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project. What is missing from that project, would you say?
Yeah, well, and I would say evolving insight at a relatively granular level. I mean, there are a number of predictions towards a 2-degree pathway or 2-degree objective. Some are just normative. They essentially say we need to be at a net zero energy system in 2050 or so. And we'll work back from there. And we'll just be normative along the way. And that amounts to some really draconian measures over the next 5 years. So essentially you have to stop in certain countries selling any sort of combustion engines, which frankly in reality is impossible. So some of those pathways we seriously question as to their validity or their plausibility. We've developed one ourselves, and we will shortly be updating it and publishing it. And that's one where we feel it's plausible. We have a lot of insight into the energy system. And it is essentially constructed by adding up a significant number of country roadmaps. So it's very granular, very detailed. There are not many institutions or companies that have anything like this. And we feel that granularity and that level of insight is required to produce anything that's meaningful. And helpful at, say, a country level to say, okay, these then are the industrial means and measures that we need to undertake. And so my contention would be that many of the roadmaps you see today, they lack the granularity and they lack the internal consistency to be able to act upon.
And you would agree that the UN is one of those. It's just not specific enough.
The direction is very good, but the specificity, I think, to turn into, if you want, country roadmaps or maybe even more granular than that, I think is lacking. But people are calling out for sectors to produce one, for countries to produce them. And so what I'm hoping for is that over the next few years, we'll see an emergence of those that will be increasingly insightful and helpful in terms of developing real action. And I think I mentioned, so we're involved in a number of significant countries in helping to develop it. So I spend quite a bit of my time in India. We're making an active effort to interact with not only the government, but NGOs and various other institutions in India to offer our insights and ideas into their energy strategy and roadmap.
Okay. What is Shell doing specifically to be a leader in alternative energy sources, not oil and gas? You talked about this already a little bit, and what commitments has Shell made to be a leader in this space?
So I would say we are significantly committed to developing new products, to dealing with the byproducts. So carbon capture and sequestration is something that we have invested a lot in, and we're also in Berkeley actively involved with. I mentioned biofuels, hydrogen, so a variety of other products, renewable investments. So I would say a lot. Now I think there's one point to add there, which is, we're a large corporation. And for us, for anything to make a material impact in our portfolio and in our results, it has to be big. I was talking to some people earlier and said, so we invest around about 25 billion every year. That's the level of our capital investment. Some of that goes to renewable energy. A lot of that goes to chemicals. A lot of that goes to offshore platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. For anything to make a material impact on our portfolio, it needs to be at a certain significant scale. You will not find investments at that scale in the renewable arena at this point in time. Certainly not ones that are economically attractive and robust. And so for us to make that transition is going to take time.
How much are you putting into renewables?
We've said something around $1 billion to $2 billion over the next few years.
Out of 25 billion total that you're spending on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you were to parse out the rest of that 25 billion, how much is oil and gas versus other types of clean energy and alternative energy?
Maybe the best way to describe it is to look across our businesses. So about 25 upwards to 30% is investing in our integrated gas business. So natural gas, liquefied natural gas. About 25% of that is in our downstream business, so retail, chemicals, so non-energy products and sort of more marketing and consumer-oriented products. And then about 40% of it would be around traditional oily investments or natural gas, pipeline gas or whatever that is associated with our oil business. So still a significant chunk in our oil business.
Okay. Next question. What do you think will be the biggest immediate shift to decarbonization technology innovation, policy or market demand? Oh, wait. Let me ask the question again since it was properly punctuated. What do you think will be the biggest immediate shift to decarbonization, technology innovation, policy or market demand?
Probably the first two. I think the first two will have a big impact on the third one. So frankly, I think that demand or consumer choices are where the stickiness is. So we just both gave some examples around how difficult it is to wean off traditional conventional means of moving ourselves. And so either significant technological advances, as we've seen, for example, with the cost of solar power over the last few decades, or perhaps a breakthrough in energy storage will make for significant shifts. But likewise, certainly at the individual country level, policy will have a big impact. So China moving 7 regions to carbon pricing will no doubt have an important impact. Interestingly, in Europe, the UK has been on a very positive path with respect to their emissions. They've essentially stalled or arrested their emissions over the past few years by making some, amongst other, subtle changes to carbon pricing, to the extent that natural gas was winning over significantly what was previously coal. And you've seen a big shift from coal to natural gas as a result of that. So subtle policy intervention, a big impact on what happened at the institutional level. So back to the question, I think the first two will be the most telling and significant, and then the third one will follow.
Well, and 2 thoughts on that. So first to the policy. So what is the thought process with Shell with sort of the direction the U.S. has pivoted in the last year? Is that that policy has changed pretty drastically in a different direction, correct?
Say more specifically?
Just in the sense of opening up offshore oil drilling and pulling out these movements that are not policy efforts toward incentives for renewable energy or with solar and that kind of thing. Yeah. At the level of our country, does that have a significant impact on decisions that you will make, that Shell will make?
No, I don't think it'll have a significant impact. So we're a big investor in the country, and we'll continue to be that. And I would say that at the state level, there are still significant incentives to make investments one way or the other. California is a great example, and I think you mentioned earlier when we spoke that, well, there are some changes to the policy environment and the fiscal environment in California, but the prevailing direction is still one that stimulates decarbonization and clean energy. So this is certainly a place for us to play in one way or another. And we will find enough opportunity across the US, I think, to do so. So this has not made for a complete or significant change in the way we look at the US as an investment climate. Maybe certainly so and locally so, but there's plenty left for us to be positive about that. And I think to an earlier point, I also don't think that grosso modo this will make for a significant change towards the momentum that the US or the world has towards Paris.
Right. The other point I was going to bring up here was the market demand part of the question, and this is on a pretty superficial level, but it's the classic example of when oil prices were going up and gas prices were going up. There was the big push toward electric cars, and they became very popular, and then gas prices came back down, and they haven't had quite the same. Tesla still had serious inroads, but we adjust our needs and demands based on our external influences as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And I think this testifies to the stickiness, which is, we're all individually also drawn by economic considerations, aren't we? So the price of the product makes a difference. Now, I don't think that fundamentally does away with the direction, because that's clear, and the need for that. But it will change the pace of whatever we have set in motion. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. A couple more questions here. What is the future of energy, wind, solar, specifically what we haven't talked about, nuclear energy?
Sorry, solar and nuclear?
What is the future of energy, but wind, solar, and then circled nuclear energy, since we haven't really talked about nuclear?
Yeah, it has a role to play. And again, certainly in certain countries, China is still significantly committed to nuclear. A lot of the nuclear builds in China. There's still a significant nuclear project in the UK. So selectively, you will find that nuclear is still, an important source of energy, and a low or no carbon one at that. But then again, there are some prevailing headwinds that we've seen in Germany and other places, Japan, for example, where, I just think that constrains any growth for nuclear in the future. So is it going to make for a wholesale change, or is it going to be a very significant component to the energy transition going forward? I don't think so. So I think solar will be the big gorilla in the end. Okay. Because you can see that already, and I think the cost curves will continue to improve, and so solar will be a very significant component of the system in a number of decades to come.
On that same front and somewhat related, how can we mitigate, and this is the big, million-dollar question, how can we mitigate energy loss of transporting energy in form of electricity rather than fossil fuels?
Yeah, that's
solar at our house where we don't have to transport it, I guess.
Well, that's still a question, isn't it? I mean, one of the things we're investing in heavily with Berkeley is dense energy carriers. And one of the big advantages of fossil fuels is exactly that one, which is the energy density. And so what I certainly hope is that we will see the technological advances that take care of that. Now, we've seen improvements in efficiency in solar, but they're still quite a ways away from the efficiency that fossil fuels bring. But I was encouraged by the work I saw today on solar tiles and solar fuels. And so I don't think it's beyond us in the next few decades to see that significantly shift. Maybe bringing it back to your first question, some of the advances I see here in material sciences, a fundamental understanding. Yesterday we were at our catalyst manufacturing site here in Pittsburgh, and where we've been for many decades manufacturing catalysts, and we're one of the leading companies globally in terms of manufacturing and selling catalysts or using them in our own facilities. And talking to the crew there, when you ask them, so what is the secret sauce here? How do you tell an effective catalyst from another? And they say, well, it's kind of an art. Increasingly we understand more, but there is still something around, when we add a little bit more of this additive, or when we heat it a little more this way, a better product comes out. And you say, you know, it's 2018, folks, you know, don't we know better?
Right.
And then today we were talking to some of the scientists, and they were, you know, using the light source and various other ways and analytics to say, we're starting to much better understand, you know, at the solid-liquid interface or at the nano level, how, you know, how these materials perform or what new materials we could make. And then I'm thinking, well, you know, we're turning the art now into a science. Right. And so there's so much more potential left that I don't rule out over the next few decades, we will see some fundamental advances that will help accelerate the journey.
Okay. John, do you have a couple more questions? I see you there. Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay, how about this? What are your competitors doing in terms of shaping a cleaner energy future? Tell us how great your competitors are.
We're all good friends. Yeah, and so at one level, I don't think any of our competitors are directionally misaligned with what I've been trying to share tonight. Mm-hmm. I do think we all see the direction, the need for the transition that we're in the midst of, but we do make different choices, you know, and those choices may be informed by the fact that we have different capabilities. We're a leader in natural gas. We're a leader in liquefied natural gas. And so some of our choices are very much built to extend that lead, because we also think it's a good choice in terms of decarbonization. It provides pathways into, say, hydrogen or so you know, we feel, and chemicals, these are good choices. But some of our competitors don't start from the same base. So they will make different portfolio choices. They will have different preferences accordingly. There are different geographies they operate within. So I think if you inspect us in the detail, you'll see that, you know, Total makes different choices from Shell, from Exxon, and you know, in some ways that may be informed by where we came from. Whereas maybe generally where we want to go is now different. Mm-hmm. But that's the long term. So in the short term, you know, choices matter. It matters in terms of your competitive position, and it's going to matter in terms of where you end up. We do feel we have some leadership. The announcement we made, and I refer to in November, to say, we have an ambition to decarbonize by 50% by 2050, and we'll do that on account also of our products and the customers using them. I think that's leading, mm-hmm. and that's differentiated, and it will inform our choices going forward quite distinctly. So today it may be more difficult to tell us apart. I would like to think that 10 years from now, it's much easier to do that in the context of very much that decision and that ambition.
Okay. I may follow up on that, but I'll get to this one first. I have another. In a country that suffers from substantial wealth inequality, such as the United States, how and why do you expect to pass the cost of carbon offsets to consumers who, unlike well-capitalized companies like Shell, don't have the means to pay this?
Yeah, no, that's an important point. So it does come down to the interaction between, you know, our commercial intent and government policies, right? And, you know, in the Netherlands, fuels get heavily taxed. Mm-hmm. Right. But that is done in order for the government to use those taxes in beneficial ways to also support underprivileged people and, you know, the more vulnerable parts of society. And so that is in a way, you know, an internally consistent cycle that has to be maintained. We don't stand to benefit from that. It's actually society at large that stands to benefit from it, and yet it is not impacting choices so much. You know, people are happy to pay, interestingly, you know, the equivalent of $2 for a liter of fuel. Mm-hmm. So this is not beyond anyone, and we have, you know, not exactly the same but similar wealth inequality. So I don't think this is a problem necessarily down to. But
what about the offsets? You know, going up and saying, do you want to, when you fill up with gas and you say, do you want to pay for an offset? Why don't you say? I think the question was more. Why don't you say Shell's going to pay for that offset for you, or we're going to match it, or something like that, so that you're taking the lead on that.
Yeah, no, we'll certainly want to provide people with choices, and to that extent, projects that are at the better end of the cost curve, mm-hmm. so that whatever people are willing to commit is not at the high end of buying the offsets that you referred to. But at the same time, it's a choice people make. They either have a choice not to make it and not to pay for it, or to face up to the consequences of the choices they make in terms of, filling up their car with fossil fuels. So I don't think, in essence, it's a bad thing. And interestingly, when we ask people, so I mentioned that, it's in some places the equivalent of $2 for a liter of fuel. We're asking people to pay 2 cents or a cent extra. So this is not onerous to an extent that they now no longer can afford schooling.
Right.
It's a very marginal additional cost that many people are actually happy to accept. So I don't think we're putting them in front of life choices to that extent.
Is there any, I guess it's almost more of a marketing question in some ways, is there an effort to say, Shell is investing, 5 pennies for every gallon of gasoline or every liter of gasoline, and we're asking you to add 1 penny on top of it. I mean, there's the concept of asking Shell to do it. Shell is doing it. It's just, I guess, a matter of how it's expressing that versus asking us to do it as consumers.
No, sure. And we could argue we're doing it in different ways. So we can put that investment to, sharing the cost of that offset, or we can put our investment to investing in clean fuels or renewable power generation. So that's a choice. And I think this point of well capitalized it's not as if we're putting the money somewhere in a safe for it never to emerge. This company spends $15 billion every year on paying dividends. And, where do the dividends go? Where do they go to pension funds? Where do the pensions go? Well, to people that need it. So I think it's, also kind of thinking through the end-to-end system that, corporates like us support. And there are no disproportionate rents. Our returns, I would say, are just acceptable, and what you would expect from a company that invests as much as we do. And so there's no disproportionate pricing. I think there's a need for more transparency on the one hand, but also a more aligned system end to end with respect to carrying the cost of the externalities that we face. And they, in the end, do come down to the individual consumer. Although, we wouldn't deny that we have a role to play in that as well.
Right. Okay, 2 more questions. I don't think we have any more from the audience, correct? You do have a few more. I'll snag those at the same time if you want to bring those up.
We'll stay here until
exactly.
until no more questions.
I'm not letting you go.
Thank you very much. Okay, is it possible for natural gas to play a significant role in a future where warming is limited to 2 degrees Celsius?
Yeah, most definitely, and in a number of ways. One is so if you had a choice between more coal or more gas, and that's a choice that you have today, and you can make happen, in the near term, then I would say choose for gas, because you're locking in the coal, and that's an alternative that gas is half to 40% more carbon friendly or less carbon intense than coal is. Okay. So it makes a significant difference if you electrify a system using natural gas vis-a-vis coal, for example. But you could argue that, if you do it with renewables, of course, there's no impact there. It's carbon free. But then I refer to the points made earlier around systems integration, the complementarity between coal and gas, the availability of gas, the affordability of gas. So I think there are lots of things that speak in favor of using gas. Is it a solution for the long term? Because you're still generating carbon. Well, this goes to the point around creating carbon sinks. So we're working hard to find efficient and effective ways to sequester carbon. And if we could, of course, we could look at a carbon neutral gas electrification system. And so in the end, that would be a way to say we can have gas, we can have renewables, and we would have no CO2. And again, some of the work we're doing here is around exactly sequestering that CO2 and turning it into useful products.
Okay. Recently, there have been studies tying specific damages due to climate change and to specific fossil fuel companies. I think New York just filed suit this week or last week, and I know California has, or several cities. What is the role and responsibility of these companies in compensating for such damages? Your personal opinion as well as Shell's, and whether you're willing to share your personal versus Shell's. It's up to you.
Well, so I don't think it would be a good thing to sort of address the individual cases, whether in New York or whether you're on the West Coast. But generally, though, I'm just not sure that this is a constructive way to move on the path we need to. Because we're now starting to polarize and demonize actors in this space that I think have a very effective role to play. And I think it's sort of denying the responsibility that each and every one of us has in making choices. Of course, meanwhile, many of these cities over the past decades have seen their energy consumption grow, and I would imagine that they also knew the consequences of that in terms of climate change, because that's not new. I mean, we haven't denied it. We've been very clear about it. We've advocated for a price on carbon, and so have these cities and these individuals played an active role in doing exactly that. And on that count, I think the answer generally is no. So unless we socialize that responsibility, I don't think we're going to make any progress. If we polarize it and we demonize individuals and individual actors, I don't think we're going to make much progress. We're going to end up in a world where it's all about, it's either this or that. It's you or me. And I don't think that will amount to any constructive ways of getting to resolve a very challenging thing at a very material level.
I read a quote from the head of Shell PR as well, sort of expressing a similar opinion, which is understandable given the circumstances of when you're in the middle of
course.
Some type of
you
lawsuit.
wouldn't expect us to say much different.
No, wouldn't actually. Okay, so wrapping this back up to where we are, UC Berkeley. You've made this commitment to UC Berkeley for the next 5 years to do to fund some of this research. Two questions for you. One, what do you hope to come out of that, besides the Holy Grail? And then two, what's your long-term commitment to not just to Cal but to universities, research centers?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say we tend to look at the long term. That's not to say that we have no interest in the short term, but I think we are a company that over time has always understood that you need to think about the long term. So 5 years is not a long term. So we're looking for a long-term commitment, but then again, you have to chunk it up into meaningful bits. So 5-year commitment is a good thing. But I would very much hope that it goes well beyond that. Mm-hmm. Both institutions, if I can call them that, have been around for a long time and very successful. So, I hope for that partnership to be there for a long time. I hope in the process that we will certainly use our partnership to strengthen our foundations. So I'd like to believe that we have strong foundations in process engineering, in some of the areas that we're working together on, and that as a result of that, we will further reinforce our qualities and our capabilities there. So, we talked today with John and others around, sending some of our scientists here, and have them even sort of, habitate in the campus. I'm sure they would love that. But as a result, that we can interact, share some of the things we know, but as a result, be able to inspire the rest of the organization to build that capability in material sciences, in electrochemistry, the things that you are absolutely brilliant at. Because we need those strong foundations and those capabilities, again, for the long term. So what I'm hoping is that we'll see that progress. And then, what I'm hoping for is that a number of these projects will actually amount to real progress, and eventually, hopefully, some products. Now, we're not looking for the Holy Grail. We are realistic enough to say, well, you're going to try a number of things that aren't all going to work out. That's just the nature of the thing. But I surely hope that we will make significant progress in terms of, how we look at the development of our catalyst. I just mentioned it. Mm-hmm. And then in that regard, last but not least, what we have seen over time is if we engage in this way, it might not be exactly that one thing that we were hoping to develop, but invariably, we will find there are 3 or 4 other things that we were able to apply in our business to a great extent. And so it will find its way in good ways. And frankly, there are a handful of other institutions that we're working with in that same way. Somewhere in the US, somewhere outside the US.
Yeah.
So. and they
That's
are
a good thing.
Equally respected and impressive.
Fantastic. Just so long as it's not that one down the road.
I won't mention that. No. It's
all right.
sensitive.
Harry, thank you very much
It's been my
for
pleasure.
joining us and for sharing some insights into your company and into renewables and energy options. And hopefully you can stay for a little bit. We'll have a little reception afterwards.
Happy to.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Tom.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you.